run to technology and think this technology can help me identify businesses, it can help me source effectively, it can help me drive my inclusive procurement spend. But the fundamentals are, if you don't have the right culture, if you don't have the right policy settings, if you don't have the right audience, the technology is just going to reflect what's existing, and you won't drive the change that you want. So I really challenge you to understand what you can do to change your policies, to create opportunity for inclusive businesses to work in your business, create conversations at a leadership level about your commitment and what steps they're willing to take. Joe's already used an example of making sure you include one women-owned business in your next tender. That's really simple to do. Fem Economy makes it extremely simple to look up on their directory, find a company that has capability and capacity, do your procurement work, understand what they do, where you can fit them in, and provide them an opportunity. The next approach I think we need to talk about is an audience-first approach, and this is really the approach I used at Microsoft when I first started this work. I really went and questioned my stakeholders, my most senior stakeholders across our senior leadership team, and really truly understood what motivated them. I wanted to understand which of those stakeholders I could push to take additional steps in the way that they use the company's money, and which of those stakeholders were willing to invest their time and effort to change the way the buying behaviour in their organisations. And if there's one thing that we know as procurement professionals, changing buying behaviour is probably the hardest thing that we do, particularly when there's been ingrained relationships, long-term development of impact from businesses in our organisations. So starting with the stakeholder is a really great approach. You're going to find sometimes it can be shocking to talk to stakeholders who you think might be super supportive of this, and they challenge you in a way that you didn't think you'd get challenged. And you might find that advocate that you didn't think existed. But I really challenge you to focus on the needs of the stakeholder first. I think good procurement starts with understanding business need and stakeholder need and aligning the two, and making sure that we can be the connector between both of the aspirations of the business and the stakeholders, and driving inclusive procurement in that way. And I think we've got a really great example with a company called April 5, who's an events management company. We used to use over 100 events management companies at Microsoft in Australia. We whittled that down to 5, really consolidated our spend there. And we also provided opportunity for inclusive businesses, Indigenous businesses, women-owned businesses to be part of that panel. And I remember we had a really frank conversation with the stakeholder about April 5, not wanting to include them in our shortlist. And I worked with the stakeholder many a time, built a relationship with them. I knew that they wanted to focus on inclusion, and they went to the next phase and actually knocked it out of the park. What they put forward on paper wasn't actually what they could put forward in person, and they became one of our largest suppliers for event management services over the last 3 years. So it was a really great win for us. We spent almost $2.5 million with them last financial year, I believe, or that might have been the year before. So I think an audience-first approach is really critical to understanding how to change behaviour in an organisation. Top-down tone is super important. But I really go back to, what does good procurement look like? How are we identifying suppliers that our stakeholders need at the right time? And how do we know that they're going to provide value for money? The misconception around inclusive businesses being more expensive is absolutely that. My opinion on that is we need to award work to companies based on merit. And I think in the women-owned businesses space, there's a lot of companies that are exceptional at what they do. They provide great value for money, and the only thing that they're missing is opportunity. And we can control that. We can control providing opportunity to women-owned businesses. The maturity of some of the businesses in the women-owned business sector astounded me at first. I got extremely curious, and then I got quite excited because it really enabled us to change our buying behaviour quite quickly. But all that really started with was good procurement, understanding the market, understanding the business need, and matching those two at the right time. I think the last thing that I really want to say is when we talk about inclusive procurement as a whole, so how are we increasing representation of underrepresented groups in our economy? we really need to ensure that the measurements and mechanisms that we set to measure our impact here are actually driving the change that we want to see. I challenge a lot of procurement professionals around whether spend is a metric that is one that we drives the impact that we want to see. Does it truly drive positive impact in the women-owned business community? Does it drive employment opportunity? Does it foster other businesses? And I really challenge you to think about how you measure your impact in this space, because I've seen a lot of organisations that are held up as leaders in the field of supply diversity who have high spend metrics, but when you really dig deep and understand the businesses that they're dealing with, understand the impact that they're having, does it really link back to that company mission? Does it link to empowering each and every person, organisation on the planet to achieve more? Or does it link to one business making a large sum of money and not the impact that we want to drive change in our society? That's a really philosophical discussion. We can learn a lot from some of the approaches that have happened in the IPP. I know Glenn Johnson's on this call, and he can probably talk to that a lot better than I can. But I think we need to challenge ourselves to understand that supply diversity or inclusive procurement isn't just something that we should be focusing on with women-owned businesses or with Indigenous businesses or disability enterprises or social enterprises. We should be focusing on this work with every single supplier in our supply chain. So when we're thinking about how we assess social impact, we need to assess that with every supplier, because it's critically important to the success of women-owned businesses that we assess them in the same way that we assess non-women-owned businesses. And I think we have a role to play in establishing clarity on our evaluation criteria, but also assessing people in the same way and not setting unrealistic expectations around employment for women-owned businesses that we don't of non-women-owned businesses. Yes, they're more likely to employ more women, but we shouldn't set that as a measurement of success for us. But what are we setting as measurements of success? If we set it for one business, it should be there for every business. So there's a lot of discussion happening. Joe and I talk about this a lot. How are we assessing every business in our supply chain and their contribution to inclusive procurement? How are we assessing every subcontractor within that supply chain and their contributions to being more inclusive? And I think when we can solve this puzzle and really focus on our whole supply chain, we're really going to see that positive social impact that we really want from this work. So that's it from me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today, and I think Susan is fastly clicking buttons trying to get her video back on. So I'll fill time while we wait, and I think we're going to move to Q&A.
No worries, thanks, Dave. Yeah, and actually what I'm madly doing, besides trying to get myself unmuted and pro-videoed, is madly taking notes on what everybody's saying, because, you know, there are just so many great insights and things that I want to comment on and press a little bit more on. But I also want to direct you to the chat where people are putting in a lot of links and things around different papers, and Alanna has put in information about how, because somebody had raised, Victoria, I think, had raised a question about whether, you know, there's documentation or papers around the benefits that working with women-owned businesses brings, so that, you know, and like what's the, I suppose there's that horrible thing to talk about, ROI, which none of us like to talk about, but, you know, obviously there's hard-nosed people in our businesses that, you know, want to know about that, and I think our speakers have been all kind of exploding those misconceptions and myths around the fact that, you know, women-owned businesses aren't as competitive, or they're not as value for money offering, or that, you know, those things that, but it's nice to have the hard facts and data behind it, because I do, you know, it was funny, again, going back to the Mars meetings, we've just done it with our team, and we have lots and lots of analyst types in our teams, and I'm sure most procurement and finance teams are like that. So, you know, you do have to bring the right messages to the right people. But I also love Dave's comments around, you know, getting talking to your stakeholders first, and you know, getting their feelings aligned, because I don't know about all of you, but I work in a center-led procurement function, And, you know, we're basically business partners and supporters of our businesses who ultimately have the say on where the money gets spent. And, you know, it's a lot of influencing, a lot of conversations. You know, you don't always win them. It's also kind of that drip approach where you just kind of have to keep mentioning, oh, did you think about putting in a, you know, women-owned business into this, or did you think about putting in, you know, another group, or, you know, whether it's a disability organization or whatever. So, you know, I think all those different strategies are really good, but and something to consider. And you just have to work out for you and your organization, you know, what might work best. So, look, I mean, I think we've kind of, one of my big questions, and we do have a couple of questions coming in, but Alanna, I know, has been answering questions as she goes in the Q&A, so also please check the Q&A, or at least, I guess, let me just check that. There was a question around the papers, and she has provided some links and things, but maybe if you provide those in the chat as well. And of course, you can reach out to all of our panelists on LinkedIn and or in the LinkedIn group that we've talked about. But yeah, I just wanted to ask a few questions, I guess. I mean, people have mentioned that intersectionality of the different areas, but Alanna, is there particular you know, arguments that you use when trying to overcome that? Oh God, I'm so tired of the social procurement. You know, you know, everyone's talking about diversity groups. You know, so is there a particular way that you overcome that kind of bias, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we've just tried to understand where they are focusing their efforts, because women-owned businesses do intersect across all of those diversity drivers. So if I think of our conversation with the New South Wales government, they have a focus on rural and regional procurement, social procurement, as well as SMEs. Queensland is SMEs. So, you know, I guess our members fit under all of those criteria. Indigenous procurement. So what we try and do is understand those procurement frameworks they have in place, you know, and try and connect our women-owned businesses with that. So say, you know, get on the New South Wales panel for marketing and communications. They have supplier forums. It's open all the time. As a first step, because yeah, we understand that, you know, procurement professionals are under the pump, and that this is an early conversation in Australia. So we do what we can in that way to work with the policies and procedures that they already have. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, Alanna. Yeah, and Joanne, I wanted to just ask you about, because I know you've talked before about the real excitement for you, and it came through in your presentation about you know, working with and building the capacity of those women-owned businesses. Have you got any insights, you know, specific things that might help some? Because I know there's some women-owned businesses on the call. I've seen, you know, shout-outs from Chocolate on Purpose, and I'm sure there's some other ones there. So yeah, any ideas that you have, or top tips, whatever?
Look, yeah, I mean, a lot of that is around, thank you, Susan, a lot of that is around having a good, solid business that you can make sure that you can supply what it is that you want to supply to an organisation, because procurement's number one role is to make sure we secure supply. So that is really critical to have a good, solid business. But just a kind of a few tiny little tips of observations that I've seen, and that's always ask for feedback. So if you don't, if you're not successful in tender, follow up on the offer for feedback. Don't be shy. Feedback is gold. So definitely ask for the feedback. The second one is get your website sorted out. It's your resume. It's your online resume. Now, depending on your organisation, depending how it's set up, an organisation like mine is massive. One of the things that I often do is send on the website link to people who I'm talking. Sending them lots of information, capability statements. It's difficult. I need to get people's attention really quickly. So get your website sorted out. What it is that you do, what it is that, who, you know, the size of contracts and your customers, super important. And then the final thing is just let us know who you are. I found that women-owned businesses are often really shy about owning up about being women-owned businesses. And thankfully, yeah, organisations like Fem Economy and We Connect have emerged to help that. But there still seems to be this reluctance of identifying yourself. So get yourself on a list like Fem Economy, or register with, you know, let me know that you're out there. Have a look on my website. I put the link in the chat there, and let me know what it is that you can supply to me, so that I can help you get in and have conversations within Westpac.
wanted to mention something that I've heard all of the speakers talk about was the maturity and the length of time that a lot of women-owned businesses have been in business. You know, they're not just fly-by-night, turned up yesterday. A lot of them have been in business for 10 years, and as Dave mentioned, you know, about the maturity that he was surprised about. And I was on a webinar yesterday with ICAC, New South Wales ICAC, and they were talking about fraud and corruption. And one of the main things to check is just basic due diligence. Who are the directors? Are there some women directors on the board? Who owned it? Are there some women there? How long has it been in business? And one of the biggest areas for potential fraud is, they've only just started up. That same director's had about 3 or 4 different businesses, that sort of thing. So, look, it sounds to me like what I've been hearing from everybody is that the due diligence that you might do as a procurement professional, you're probably going to be really positively surprised by, that maturity and that sophistication and the value for money that those women-owned businesses can offer. But I did have another question for Dave. Early on, you mentioned that one of the first things you did in your approach was you met with senior stakeholders, and you identified who were the sort of closet champions, and who were the people that kind of surprised you that maybe weren't as didn't put their money where their mouth was, so to speak. But it did sound like you had a bit of gravitas and a bit of opportunity. So how does it work for someone who's a bit lower down the food chain? You might be just a procurement analyst or a procurement officer, somebody starting out a bit more junior in the role. What do you say to them and say, well, I can't just go talk to my senior stakeholders?
Well, I'd probably say, Susan, that they can, but I know I'm not in every organisation. So what I always encourage people to do is really think about what you can do in your day job, right? So if you're an analyst, have you used firm economies database to analyse capability, capacity of suppliers against your supplier list and your spend list? I mean, that's one step that everyone can take tomorrow. It's freely available. And if you're a procurement leader or a manager, have you looked at the firm economy gender equality toolkit? You can use a lot of the tools there, and I definitely say that I've reviewed that. I spoke to Alanna and Jade when they were putting it together. I think there's some really great tips there. But more importantly, I think at any stage in your procurement life, you can start a conversation about this. So in your next team meeting, why don't you have a conversation about women-owned businesses and how you can support them? Take that up to your leadership team. Talk to them about their approach. If it's a team of 2, have the conversation. If it's a team of 200, also have the conversation. Invite Alanna to come in and give everyone the shocking statistics around women-owned businesses' participation in our economy. Because one of the key statistics, I'm not sure if you said it, Alanna, was around 1% of GDP with women-owned businesses. To me, that's absolutely unacceptable, and we need to do something about it. So at every single stage, you can find a data point, you can find a key message, you can find a story which should motivate someone in your business to change their buying behaviour. So I challenge everyone just to identify that one thing they can do, something in your control. It doesn't have to be a whole policy change. It doesn't have to be something extremely significant. If I can challenge every single one of you within 6 months to have one more women-owned business in your supply chain, or change in your policy, or at least a conversation with your procurement team, that's what I'd do. It doesn't have to be big at the beginning. You can start small and grow it out, and you'll be surprised by the momentum you get in your organisation.
Wow. Yeah, thanks so much for that, Dave.